Hello everybody, it's Rendon again. I actually didn't have any plans at all whatsoever to make any more videos before the DLC. But as in all things, life intervened, I made a build, and I didn't want to talk about it, but I wanted to talk about something else around it. So that's what we're going to do today. Just a heads up, this video is going to contain one very minor spoiler in the form of a mention of one of the new weapon types that was revealed in the Shadow of the Erdtree demos that were released by the streamers that went there and did that, obviously, over the last couple of days. It's not going to be a specific weapon of any kind, just the mention of the weapon type. I will list where that is right here down below, so if you want to skip that little section, you can certainly do so. I made a build, and I've made a lot of builds. This one specifically, I was like, okay, I want to do something kind of stupid, kind of fun. Nobody really at all uses guard counters, and I made a video about guard counters probably 9 months ago, 8-9 months ago, something like that. I came up with a theme around it. I wanted to use axes, great axes, make it kind of a Cthulhu-esque, uncanny, creepy kind of woodsman character. All strength with some Ashes of War that are a little bit more like arcane-y, Bloodborne-ish, that kind of thing. And that's what I went with. But guard counters are not great, and this build at level 138 is not incredible against things you come across. It got better because of problem solving and figuring out your build, and when something doesn't first work, not giving up on it and just refining it a little bit till you get it to the place you want to get to, and not getting discouraged when you spent all this time in an invasion or making a build for invasions and it doesn't work out. So why am I bringing this up now? Well, when I first made this, I was like, okay, I'll use axes, I'll use great axes, use some Ashes of War that are kind of fun. I'll take it to 138. I have not played at this range in over a year, and I'll see what it's like. And then I lost for like 2 straight days. I don't mean I lost a couple invasions. I lost like every invasion, and I could not figure out what was going on. Now, part of it was because at the time specifically, still now, but even especially back then, it was a little bit right after the swing of the big story trailer coming out for Elden Ring. So the people planning for the game coming back in was kind of at a fever pitch. It's still now, but it felt those couple of days like I came across, every party I came across was 3 people. And they were all rocking builds from like patch 1.0 or whatever the first playable Elden Ring patch was for all of us back in the day. Moonveil, Rivers of Blood, all of it. And this build just could not compensate with it. And I took that personally, because why wouldn't an invader who's played this for several thousands of hours and attached a lot of his psyche to this game and this mechanic in this game not attach himself to that type of loss? But that's besides the point. The point was I didn't give up. I recognized that it wasn't the build necessarily or me that was doing something wrong. I just hadn't gotten this particular character to where it needed to be really effective in invasions. And so I just needed to fine-tune it a little bit more to figure out what that looked like. I needed to get it to the point where if it came across a moderately strong build to an entirely YouTube influenced one, it wouldn't just crumble under that pressure. Now the build works far, far better, to the point where I'm not losing nearly as many invasions as I was before, unless again I'm coming across some extremely ridiculous and kind of outlandishly strong builds. But that's rare. Even though it does happen, it's not as much of a concern. Another thing that I noticed that has probably helped is my attitude has improved a lot since the build has been fine-tuned and has reached a point where it can sustain itself pretty well in most situations. And that has actually improved my fun. And that's something else I want to talk about today just a little bit. Your attitude doesn't necessarily determine your skill in these games, but it does determine how well you play, which in turn feeds back into the amount of fun you have. So we'll talk about that today too. You might also notice that this video is not scripted. I've been doing scripted videos for the last 5 or 6 months now, and it's going to be the way I do things moving forward for pretty much all my videos. Occasionally, though, I might have a topic that I want to talk about a little bit more candidly, get away from the scripting because it means something to me. or I deem it just to be something that's a little bit more, it comes across better if it's just candidly talked about. This is one of those things. So I've already rehashed my invader history a dozen times over. We don't need to talk about that. But one of the big things that I've always struggled with, especially when I was newer to this, was I make builds, and I don't like to stick with them. I have builds that I've enjoyed, but I don't have favorite builds that I keep going back to over and over and over again. It's not something that I get a kick out of as an invader. I like making new things, trying new things, and making fun new builds to try out. That's my enjoyment in this. I will occasionally go back and play some old characters I've made, but most times my method is I plan out a character, I make the character, I do invasions with it, maybe I'll make a video about it, and then I like to do something else. I like to move on to the new thing, and then I'll rarely come back to it. As such, the setups that I made to deal with the invasions that I'm dealing with, the combos that I learned, all the spell rotations, things like that, I put that all behind me and I make something new moving forward. And while that keeps the game fresh, again, the problem is that I'm having to relearn, retool, and kind of refigure out what makes each invader work every single time. And it's not always an incredibly smooth process. Sometimes it is, a lot of times it's not, and this character was another example of that. Now, invaders that stick to one build that they know really well will probably not have this problem that I'm dealing with, but if you are someone who's just starting out, or you like to switch new builds out every once in a while because you just get tired of the one you're playing with, this might be something that you can get something out of. But if you're an experienced invader and you know what this is, maybe it will just help to have another experienced invader say that they deal with the same thing. I know for me, that is cathartic to hear someone else say, hey, look, I deal with these problems too. It's not just you. So again, the problem. When I first made this build, I had all the weapons I wanted, I had all the upgrade materials I needed, I had all the talismans I wanted, I had the theme I wanted, I had the fashion I wanted, I had, all the flasks were upgraded, everything was good to go. But it wasn't working. There was a problem with it. I just wasn't winning invasions. And so at that point, I went into troubleshooting mode, problem-solving mode, which I always do. And the point at that time is to figure out, okay, what is going wrong? Is it something I'm doing? Is it the build itself? Is there a certain weapon on there I'm trying to rely too much on? What is happening? What is not working? And then from there, I figure out how to fix the problem. So when I first envisioned this idea, I was like, okay, so the thing I need a big hyper armor weapon, a big poised damage weapon, and then I need a fast weapon for chase downs. And I wanted to use the hand axe. I knew that. So I was like, the hand axe is fun. I've never really played around with it that much. It'd be a good weapon to chase, people down with on a strength build, fully maxed out. I think it has something like A scaling and strength, which is really good. It does a lot of damage. But then I needed a heavy weapon to go with that. So I was like, okay, I've never used the long haft axe. And the long haft axe gives you a little bit of extra hyper armor, or at least so the wiki says. I haven't tested it out myself, but it does damage. It's a big weapon. If you switch to the one-handed moveset, you can do that large sweeping running R2, which is really, really good for catching multiple people. It's a good weapon. It does good damage. Problem is, the moveset kind of locks you into playing. It doesn't work well against multiple people because two-handed, it does those overhead smashes straight down, and while that's good for catching one player one-on-one, fighting against 2 or 3 people, it does not work. And even with an Ash of War like Waves of Darkness or Earthshaker, on the long haft axe, I was finding that I was just swinging and then getting hit by 2 phantoms. Even if I was connecting with the host or whatever player I hit, I was getting out-traded every single time, and I just could not keep up with the damage. And I didn't have a weapon that could focus enough on multiple people to make it work. And so the long haft axe, offhand hand axe, not offhand, but soft swapped hand axe, was not working. It just didn't fit. And so I had to switch out or figure out what I could do from there. Because the main thing I wanted was to land those sweet, beautiful guard counters with the long haft axe. They'll do like 900, 970 damage. And that's the main gimmick, right? I want to use that gimmick. So how to make that work? I made a little bit of a sacrifice, and instead I started off all invasions with the Zweihander instead of the long haft axe. And so what I would do was I would use the Zweihander, I would take out 1 Phantom, 2 Phantoms, and then when I was down to the host, I would switch to long half-axe so that I could get the guard counters that I wanted to on the host. And I have a much better time dealing with one person one-on-one with this weapon. In fact, against one player one-on-one, or maybe even against 2 sometimes, it does just fine. It does well. But the Zweihander really kind of evened those odds at first, because we all know how good the Zweihander is. It would let me take out 1 Phantom or 2 Phantoms or whatever before that, and then I could switch off of it to the weapon I really wanted to use. And so there I'd solved the first problem. Now I didn't get there first try. I had to kind of test out some different weapons. But when I figured it out, the build went from like not winning anything because it wasn't set up correctly to deal with big parties of people, to winning a whole lot more. Now there's the second part of the problem. I figured out the setup I needed to deal with any Phantoms or stray blues that came into the world so I could get down to the host, or just the host and 1 other Phantom, and be able to deal with them with the weapons that I wanted to use. But I still hadn't been able to test the long half-axe or the hand-axe guard counters because I'd spent too long and too much time with my ass getting handed to me to actually be able to see if they work. Fortunately, the long half-axe, while it's slow with its guard counters, they still come out fast enough and do enough damage to reliably catch people stuck in longer animations like an Ash of War or using an R2. And with the hand axe, I had just enough stamina to be able to catch bigger things like great swords and some other weapons and get the guard counter off on that. Now that guard counter is a whole lot faster. So by solving problem 1, I was able to then spend the time to figure out problem 2. So if you're in a spot where you're trying to make something work, you don't know if it's going to work, you need to figure out first and foremost how to kill people, how to kill players, how to get Phantoms out of the way, how to get Blues out of the way, and then from there you can solve the rest of the build, the rest of the problem. So just remember that and tackle it in that order, and you'll be fine. Some of you are like, well, you know, Rendon, you said at the beginning of this video you're going to talk about spoilers for some weapons for the DLC, and it's been this entire video, and you haven't talked about it, and people have already clicked off. What are you doing? That's true, and I kind of forgot to talk about it till this point, but it does tie in, and I'll tell you the reason it ties in. So, with every DLC that From Software has ever released, there have been fun new weapons that have come out. Great new weapons. The best weapons you can get a hold of. But out of those weapons, there have always been a couple of standouts that have really made players struggle to deal with them until they learn the movesets, until From Software balanced them, you know, for all sorts of reasons. You know, there's a lot of different things. Weapons that stayed and haunted players' minds until they figured out how to deal with them. And this DLC is going to be the exact same thing. Alright, so again here, spoilers for the one weapon that I want to talk about from Shadow of the Erdtree in this video. It was released, one of the weapon types that was brought up was a perfume bottle. And I'm not talking about the perfume bottles that we have right now in Elden Ring that are consumable. This is a perfume bottle weapon. It has R1s, R2s, a big area effect charge R2 that sprays the perfume all around you, and it doesn't cost FP to use. It's just a normal weapon. So, in my head, the alarm bells that went off were, okay, this is going to be unparryable because perfumes probably won't be parryable. This is easily spammable. It doesn't cost FP. I can easily see how this can do ungodly damage with the right kind of builds and scaling and different talismans that buff damage. This seems to be the type of thing that will be one of the issues we'll have to contend with as kind of a really overpowered weapon. It may not end up being that because some people were saying it has some short range to it. But this is kind of what I want to come to in this. At the start of Elden Ring, and even now, when you're making builds against things that are spammy, that are strong, that are hard to play against, it can feel like a real uphill battle to make certain things work when you're dealing with things that you know work and that other people know work, and that's why they use them. You will never, ever find someone using Moonveil be like, yeah, Moonveil, it took me a while to figure out how to do that. I struggled making that work. But someone using something like the hand axe or the long haft axe may struggle to find a way to make that thing work. And I think that's why a lot of players go down the rabbit holes they do with using certain weapons, and only certain weapons, because they're easy to use and people know they work. Anything in Elden Ring can work. If you find a weapon in this DLC and you want to use it, but it's not performing the way you want it to in Invasions, don't give up on it. You don't have to choose between doing well in Invasions and using the weapons that you think are going to be fun. You can have both. You just need to take the time to figure out what's wrong and figure out how you can fix it. And I promise you, you can have both. And then you will enjoy the Invasions far more because of it. Thanks for watching. And good luck to us all in the DLC. May God help us.